What if I told you that one of the most terrifying horror films of the 70s was cursed before the camera ever rolled for the first take? That the script was written under dictation, but not from the director, from the mafia, and that the actors on this project weren't just playing madness, they genuinely hated each other so much that one night, they almost killed a colleague right on set. Today, we're diving into the darkest hole of Italian cinema. The film they call La Notte dei Diavoli in Italy and La Noche de los Diablos in Spain, 1972. Genre: horror. But this isn't just horror. This is the chronicle of a cinematic catastrophe. Welcome to JustSneak. If you love it when real scandals hide behind a glossy picture, when people's lives fall apart on set, and when masterpieces are born from blood and hatred, hit that subscribe button. We're turning on the dirtiest camera in film history. We shouldn't start this story with the credits. We should start with a smell. In the early 70s, Italian cinema was going through a golden age of exploitation. Giallo, spaghetti westerns, erotica, they shot anything, as long as the cash registers rang. Right at that moment, producers Luigi Albani and Eduardo Manzanos, two sharks of the Italian and Spanish markets, decided they needed their own version of Nosferatu, only harder, more erotic, and with a hint of the occult. And here's where the first intrigue begins. The idea for the project didn't come from the director. It came from a screenwriter who'd just been pulled out of a mental institution. I'm not joking. The initial draft of the script, based on Alexei Tolstoy's play The Vampire, was commissioned from a screenwriter who had just been released from a psychiatric hospital. Rumors say the studio deliberately sought out troubled creators to give the film an authentic kind of madness. The conflict between the studios flared up immediately. The Italians wanted a pure horror film focused on blood. The Spaniards insisted on erotica and folkloric motifs. In the end, a contract was signed, and rumor has it, the deal was sealed not with a handshake, but with an envelope of cash in a Naples bar. The spirit of crime was already hanging over the project from day one. But if you think that chaos started on set, you are deeply mistaken. The main scandal of this film lies with the director. When Giorgio Ferroni was appointed to the helm, the whole industry whispered, they shouldn't have done this. Why? Because Ferroni wasn't just a director, he was a walking scandal. Giorgio Ferroni was a man who, by that time, had already wrecked his career in mainstream cinema because of alcoholism and uncontrollable rage. They called him the Priest of Fury. In 1970, just 2 years before the Night of the Devils, he was arrested for a bar brawl involving an actor from his previous film. They say Ferroni always carried a loaded revolver on set to keep unruly actors in line. Knowing his reputation, the producers laid down a strict rule. No alcohol on set, not a drop. And you know what happened? He agreed. But he demanded that his wife stay by his side at all times as a supervisor. That created an atmosphere of total surveillance and paranoia. Actors recalled that Ferroni spoke to them only through his wife, sitting in the corner and drilling holes in them with his stare. He was paranoid. He thought the screenwriters were secretly rewriting the script to please the Spanish side, and that the cinematographer was trying to set him up. The scandalous episodes from his career are a whole universe in themselves. A few years earlier, Ferroni had been one of the most promising Western directors. But his conflict with actor Lee Van Cleef became legendary. They didn't speak for 3 months, communicating only through notes passed by an assistant. On the Night of the Devils, that persecuted genius complex came out in full force. He started changing the script on the fly, at night, behind the producers' backs, adding scenes of violence that shocked even the most hardened crew members. For him, this wasn't a horror movie. It was a chance to unleash the depression and aggression that had built up over years of lawsuits and political turmoil. Because Ferroni had been involved in scandals with far-right circles in Rome, which made him toxic for public funding. When the cameras finally rolled, hell literally descended. Let me tell you what happens when you gather people who hate each other in a forest with no cell service, and the only entertainment is destroying each other's lives. The production of La Notte dei Diavoli wasn't just a troubled set. It was a textbook case of cinematic insanity. Filming took place in an abandoned estate somewhere in the Spanish wilderness, not far from Barcelona. The location was chosen specifically so nobody could interfere, but it also became a prison. The main conflict erupted between the two actresses playing the female leads. I won't name names, but according to the lighting crew, One of them, a star of Spanish erotica, considered herself the main diva. The Italian actress, on the other hand, was the protege of a producer. The fight started over wardrobe. Sounds funny, right? Well, the fact that they slipped laxatives into each other's coffee on set, that's straight up criminal. It got so bad that one of them refused to come out of her trailer if the other was on camera. Director Ferroni, who was already unstable, loved it. He pitted them against each other like fighting dogs, convinced that real hatred on screen looked more convincing than any acting. Firings also came quickly. The cinematographer, a legendary Spanish master, left the set in the third week. The official reason was creative differences. Unofficially, Ferroni had assigned his own man to watch the cinematographer's every move. And one night, they got into a physical fight because the DP dared to reposition a light without asking the director. He was replaced in 2 days, and the new cameraman worked non-stop, 7 days a week, which led to an accident. He fell asleep behind the wheel of a production car and drove straight into a tree. And of course, censorship. Pressure came not only from the church, which had already gotten wind of the blasphemous script, but also from the Spanish government. Spain was still under Franco's dictatorship, and any mention of sexual liberation or the occult was mercilessly cut. The producers had to shoot double versions of scenes, one for Italy, more explicit, and one for Italy, more explicit, and one for Spain, the censored one. That doubled the budget and drove the entire crew to the brink of a breakdown. Financing was on the verge of collapse every week. According to rumors, to finish filming, the producers had to pawn their own cars. So what do we actually see on screen after all this madness? The plot, at first glance, is simple. A young banker named Nicola ends up by fate in an abandoned estate where strange family lives, terrorized by something unclean. But don't rush for the popcorn. Hidden inside this simplicity is a bomb. The Night of the Devils is, in essence, the first attempt in European cinema to merge vampirism with psychosomatics. Here, evil is a contagious disease transmitted through passion. The setup: the protagonist gets stranded in the woods after his car breaks down. He's met by brothers and sisters whose family is literally rotting from the inside because of a curse. And here's where it gets really interesting. The themes the film raises are a mirror reflection of the scandal happening behind the camera. It's a film about how madness destroys family bonds. Director Ferroni, who at the time was going through a painful divorce and a custody battle, poured all his pain into the script. The family in the film falls apart because of jealousy, sexual obsession, and greed. Sound familiar to the atmosphere on set? Every shot is either a cry for help or an act of aggression. The connection to real-life scandals is direct. Just like the producers, the characters in the film try to hide their dirty secret from the outside world. But it bursts out at night, literally, with incredible brutality. Mild spoiler: the transformation scene here is shot so that even today it causes physical discomfort. And it's not makeup, it's actual camera work with distorted lenses, made possible only because no one on the crew was in control anymore. They were running on pure adrenaline. And then, the film wrapped. It seemed like they could finally exhale, but no. The loudest act was just beginning. The premiere. The premiere of The Night of the Devils in Rome in 1972 wasn't a film screening, it was a riot. The scandal broke before the lights even went down in the theater. In the lobby, two producers, one Italian, one Spanish, got into a fistfight. They couldn't agree on who owned the final cut. The brawl was so serious the police were called. But the worst was waiting inside. When one of the most explicit scenes appeared on screen, a group of audience members, representatives of the Catholic League of Decency, started smashing the glass in the projection booth, demanding the screening be stopped. Critics were split into two camps. Some called the film disgusting, pornographic garbage. Others hailed it as a revolutionary breakthrough in psychological horror. But the consequences were devastating. Director Ferroni, who had been expecting triumph, sank into deep depression. The film was banned in 3 Italian provinces. In Spain, it wasn't released until 2 years later, and even then, it was cut by 12 minutes. For many, it was the end of their careers. The producers sued each other. The lawsuits dragged on for 5 years, and in the end, the production company that made the film went bankrupt. The actors involved in the Siete scandals never worked together again, and one of them, the main villain, was practically never cast in big films afterward. Studios were afraid of his demonic reputation, which he'd earned during production. Now let's dig deeper, because there are facts that were kept quiet for decades. I found archived interviews with the assistant director who worked on this picture. First, real hatred. The actor who played the head of the family and the actress who played his wife genuinely despised each other. One day they got into such a serious argument because, in her opinion, he'd grabbed her too roughly in a scene, that she called a friend of hers, who showed up on set with a baseball bat. Filming stopped for 2 days. Who set up whom? Now, it's a detective story. The producers, trying to salvage their bankrupt budget, hired a private investigator to watch the director, suspecting he was overspending on materials. But Ferroni outmaneuvered them. He stole part of the footage and threatened to destroy it if they didn't pay him his full fee. It was blackmail. The scenes that were cut. The original version contained about 10 minutes of zoophilia scenes in the context of rituals, which according to the editor, were filmed but then personally destroyed by a priest brought in during post-production to purify the material. The producers agreed to this to avoid a prison sentence for distribution of obscenities, which they were facing under Italian law at the time, and the secret connections. Turns out, one of the crew members was a police informant. In those years, Italian intelligence services actively infiltrated the film industry to track directors' ties to political radicals. Through this man, information went upstairs that Ferroni was using the sets to meet with suspicious individuals. The film became a point of contention not only in art but also in high politics. And now, half a century later, how do we look back at this chaos? What turned out well, against all odds? The visuals. The cinematography, despite the replacements, is brilliant. The Spanish landscape here acts as a character of its own. Rotting trees, fog that wasn't manufactured. It was real, because filming took place in a season when the forest was literally suffocating from dampness. That gave the film the oppressive atmosphere that modern technology can't replicate. Where did the film fail? In editing. Because of the conflicts, the editors worked in different countries, never seeing each other's material. As a result, the storylines sag, and character logic sometimes feels schizophrenic. The box office failure was crushing. In Italy, it made pocket change, which for a horror film was a disgrace. How did the scandals affect its reception? Strangely enough, they also created its cult. In the 80s, when the film was released on VHS in the United States and the UK under the title The Night of the Devils, the rumors of a cursed movie where the actors really went insane turned it into a legend. Critics reevaluated it. Today, The Night of the Devils is considered a precursor to masterpieces like Kubrick's The Shining. Because here, for the first time, the theme of the solitude of madness in a confined space was shown. It became a cult classic, not because of the chaos, but in spite of it. It's forgotten by mainstream audiences, but horror fans call it the holy grail of Italian Satanism. So what is La Notte di Diavoli? It's not just a movie. It's a cinematic corpse that rose from the grave to prove its own vitality. It's the story of how human pride, greed, alcohol, and jealousy nearly destroyed a work of art, but how the chaos itself gave it that devilish spark. This film changed the industry because, after it, Italian producers introduced an unwritten rule. Never hire 2 stars who are in the middle of a divorce on the same project. And never trust a director who shows up on set with a weapon. It destroyed Ferroni's career. He never made another film of this scale again. He became a craftsman churning out low-budget oddities. But for us, the audience, he left a legacy. A dark, grimy, incredibly atmospheric document of an era when cinema was dangerous. On JustSneak, we love digging into stories like this. If you want to hear about even crazier projects, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment about which film you think is the most cursed of all. And I'll sign off now to prepare new investigations for you. Remember, wherever it smells of sulfur, there's always a story they tried to hide. See you.